I'm going to talk to you about prisoners, ex-prisoners, and their rehabilitation. Imagine somebody will be wondering, why talk about these kinds of people? Imagining somebody will say, really, at this kind of platform, when we haven't thought enough about those who are outside the prisons? You may have thought they deserve it. You may have thought they should be locked up and throw away the key. I also used to think that way. Until 1990, something happened that changed the course of my life. I had the opportunity to learn a little bit more about those we lock up in the various police cells and the various detention centers and prisons in this country. And by the way, there are about 19 institutions that have the ability to detain persons in Nigeria. At the age of 24, in 1994, I decided that it was enough to just read about these things, feel bad about them, that I can at least make some contribution. It may be modest, it may be little, but at least let me do something. So I started the organization, Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action Power, in 1994, 16 December 1994. And what was it that I saw that changed the course of my life? What was it that I saw that gave me a new sense of awakening, a new sense of consciousness? I found that, contrary to my previous perception, that those who find in prison, there are some that are innocent. I found that there were some that were just there because they are poor. There's nobody who could speak for them, act on their behalf. I found that there were some who were there just because they were powerless, they knew nobody, they had no contacts. I found that there were some of them who had little or no education, little or no jobs, little or no family ties, poor communication skills. I found that there were some of them who had drawn into drug abuse and misuse. I find out also there were some who had been battered as children, sexually abused. It was as if these were indeed those who the communities and indeed the society have made worth the wear. It's not only about Nigeria. In 2011, I had the opportunity of doing a research in 69 prisons cut across Kenya, Zambia, Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda. And the stories are not too different. Perhaps the nuances and the variations may be of different levels, but the stories are not too far from what I have just described. So the question I want to ask you, my dear sister, this moment is really, why should we begin to talk about rehabilitation of those who we find in prison? It actually speaks to the fact that it can be you. It can actually be somebody, your brother, your sister, your father, your mother. It can be indeed, and I'm telling you this of a truth, it can be anybody else. It can't indeed be anybody. So the notion at least of being our brother's keepers and being our sister's keepers, the notion of at least giving something back, the notion of at least trying to make sure that those you find in prisons, you are processed in such a way that when they come out, they will not reoffend again, lies at the heart of the whole concept of rehabilitation. To ensure that the whole problem where we have over 60% of the persons who we find in prisons, going out of prison and coming back because they have reoffended, making sure that is stopped, or at least reduced to the merest minimum. In Nigeria, there are about 224 prisons, 85 satellite lockups, and the stories is also not different across from one to another. In Nigeria, you have a system where over 70% of those who are in prisons are indeed awaiting trial persons. You may think it's not a problem, but when I tell you that some of them stay 10 years and more in those situations, you can understand. So we need to help them so that they don't reoffend. We need to help them because there are people who they are being in prison affect their families, their children, their spouses. We need to also think about community safety, because everyone you see in prison, one day, unless he dies in prison, is going to come out. So you may not like them. But please, if you like yourself, you need to talk about community security, safety. Do I also need to remind you about the whole notion of development? Do you know about how much this country spends in feeding prisoners? Recently, the feeding was increased to about 40 naira per day per prisoner. Now think about what it is. So even if you take 67,000 persons across 365 days, you will know what that means. Many of the people you find in prison, over 80%, are still in their productive years. And you shout about what you can do to help your nation become better. There's a lot of things we can do. We can look at how we spend less in prison, how we can put money into community corrections, how we can ensure that rather than spend money, you have these people do something else to contribute to the society. You and I can help break the shackles of reoffending behavior. You and I can help stop persons coming into the prison in the first instance. You and I can make a difference. On a final note, I want to say to you, whatever it is that you feel passionate about, whatever you feel it is that you feel so angry about, you can do something. And there are stories I can tell you. I can tell you about Cletus, who was in prison for 24 years because he was mentally ill. The family could not feed him, they could not pay for his drugs, and therefore they felt to avoid stigma, they could lock him up. I can tell you about the story of Felix Obi, who, after we met him in Ijebode prison, we had him, he worked with the organization. Today, Felix has a wife with 5 children, and they're doing well. There are many, do you know, that are not as lucky as Cletus to get out after 24 years. They may die. There are many that are not as lucky as Felix. But from this moment, you can say, what can I do? You can do something to stop somebody from even committing offense in the first instance, giving them job, identifying the areas of risk. You can do something by helping those who are in prison have a new sense of life, a new sense of belonging, whether be it in education, in spiritual modeling, in rehabilitation of different kinds, including in vocational training. You can, as a private entrepreneur, give something back even in those places. You can also assist Prawa, because at this moment, Prawa is setting up a youth rehabilitation and empowerment village. A village that can be self-sustaining. A village that can at least be there for people to help them create jobs so that they don't go into crime. A village that can be there to help those who have family members in the prison so that they have somebody to fall back on. A village that can welcome those who are coming out of prison and make them better. Let's start from the areas where we have spheres of control. There are many areas you have a spheres of control. On this issue, you can start, and you can start today. Thank you.